Sean Hannity leaned back in his Fox News studio chair, that familiar smirk spreading across his face as he prepared to demolish his next guest. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat across from him via satellite from Dallas, her composed expression giving no hint of what was about to unfold. "Look, Congresswoman Crockett," Hannity began, his voice dripping with condescension, "let's be honest here. You're a freshman Democrat who thinks she knows everything about America, but you've never actually accomplished anything meaningful. You're just another squad wannabe looking for your 15 minutes of fame." The studio panel chuckled. Conservative commentator Jason Chaffetz nodded approvingly. Political analyst Tammy Bruce rolled her eyes in agreement. They all thought this would be another easy takedown of a young progressive lawmaker, but what happened in the next 30 seconds would leave Hannity speechless, stun his entire panel, and create a viral moment that would dominate social media for weeks. Because Jasmine Crockett had done her homework, and she was about to turn Hannity's own words against him in the most devastating way possible. Before we dive into how this Dallas congresswoman completely dismantled one of Fox News's biggest stars, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these incredible political showdowns. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The tension in the studio was electric. Hannity's panel looked confident, almost bored, expecting another routine destruction of a Democrat. Conservative commentator Jason Chaffetz was already checking his notes for his planned follow-up attack. Political analyst Tammy Bruce had that familiar smirk that suggested she was ready to pile on once Hannity had softened up his target. But experienced political observers watching from home might have noticed something the panel missed. Crockett wasn't fidgeting or looking nervous like most Democratic guests did when facing the Fox News firing squad. Instead, she was calmly organizing papers on her desk, occasionally making notes, and displaying the kind of composed confidence that usually belonged to seasoned trial attorneys preparing for cross-examination. Her calm smile should have been their first warning that this wasn't going to go as planned. Sean Hannity sits at the top of the conservative media empire. For over 2 decades, he's been Fox News's primetime king, commanding an audience of millions every single night. His show consistently ranks as one of the most watched programs in cable news. Politicians fear appearing on his show because Hannity has perfected the art of the hostile interview. He interrupts, he talks over guests, and he uses his home field advantage to maximum effect. Hannity built his reputation by taking down Democratic politicians with rapid-fire questions and prepared talking points. He's made careers crumble and turned seasoned lawmakers into fumbling messes on live television. At 62 years old, he's seen it all, done it all, and believes he can handle any Democrat they put in front of him. His confidence comes from experience. Over the years, he's dismantled everyone from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Nancy Pelosi. His formula is simple: attack their experience, question their intelligence, and overwhelm them with statistics they can't quickly verify. It's worked for decades. On the other side sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas's 30th congressional district. At 43, she's a relative newcomer to Congress, having been sworn in just 2 years ago. But dismissing her as inexperienced would be a massive mistake that Sean Hannity was about to learn the hard way. Before Congress, Crockett was a civil rights attorney who built her reputation in Dallas courtrooms, fighting cases that others wouldn't touch. She spent over a decade taking on powerful opponents and winning cases that seemed impossible. She's argued before the Texas Supreme Court, taken on some of the biggest corporations in America, and never backed down from a fight, no matter how intimidating her opponents seemed. Her legal background wasn't just about winning cases, it was about preparation, strategy, and never walking into a courtroom without knowing more about your opponent than they knew about themselves. Crockett had developed a reputation among Dallas lawyers for her meticulous research and devastating cross-examinations. Corporate lawyers dreaded facing her because she always seemed to know exactly where their weak spots were. This courtroom experience had taught her something that most politicians never learn: the importance of controlling the narrative through superior preparation. While other attorneys relied on charisma or intimidation, Crockett won cases by being better prepared than everyone else in the room. Crockett also serves on the House Oversight Committee, where she's gained national attention for her sharp questioning during high-profile hearings. She's the kind of lawyer who does her research, prepares for every angle, and never walks into a fight without ammunition. But tonight, the stakes were higher than usual. This wasn't just another cable news appearance. Hannity had specifically targeted Crockett after she'd criticized his coverage of voting rights issues in Texas. He'd spent the previous week mocking her on his show, calling her just another squad wannabe, and questioning whether she was smart enough to represent her district. For Crockett, this was personal. Hannity had attacked not just her politics, but her competence, and her right to be in Congress. For a black woman in politics, these attacks carry extra weight. She knew that millions of viewers would be watching to see if she could hold her own against one of conservative media's biggest bullies. The setting made it even more challenging. Crockett was appearing via satellite from her Dallas office, while Hannity had his full panel and studio audience. Everything was designed to give him the advantage: the camera angles, the lighting, even the slight audio delay that would make it harder for her to interrupt. This wasn't just a political debate. It was a test of whether a first-term Congresswoman could stand up to the full force of the Fox News machine. And Sean Hannity was about to learn that he'd picked the wrong target. The attack began immediately. Hannity didn't waste time with pleasantries or softball questions. He came out swinging with the confidence of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. "Congresswoman Crockett, let's talk about your voting record," Hannity said, shuffling through papers on his desk for dramatic effect. "In your short time in Congress, you've voted with the radical left 97% of the time. You've supported defunding the police, you've voted against border security, and you've backed every single one of Biden's disastrous economic policies." The panel nodded in agreement. Jason Chaffetz, the former Utah congressman turned Fox contributor, jumped in immediately. "Sean, this is exactly what we're seeing from these new progressive members. They come to Congress with zero experience, and immediately start voting for policies that hurt American families." Tammy Bruce piled on, "It's clear that Congresswoman Crockett is just taking orders from AOC and the squad. She's not thinking for herself or representing her constituents." Hannity leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "Congresswoman, how do you respond to the fact that your own constituents are suffering from inflation? Crime is rising in Dallas, and yet you're more focused on progressive talking points than actually solving problems." Crockett remained calm, but you could see a flash of something in her eye. "Sean, I appreciate you having me on, but let's start with some facts instead of talking points." "Facts?" Hannity interrupted, his voice rising. "The fact is that you've been in Congress for less than 2 years, and you think you know better than people who've been serving this country for decades. The fact is that your policies are failing, your district is struggling, and you're more concerned with getting on MSNBC than actually governing." The studio audience murmured appreciatively. This was vintage Hannity, aggressive, relentless, and designed to overwhelm his guest. But Crockett didn't look flustered. Instead, she was taking notes. Chaffetz couldn't resist jumping back in. "Sean, I've served in Congress. I know what it's like to actually have to make tough decisions. What I see from Congresswoman Crockett is someone who's more interested in sound bites than solutions." "Exactly right, Jason," Hannity agreed, now fully in his element. "Congresswoman, you've been in Congress for 18 months. What have you actually accomplished? Can you name one significant piece of legislation you've authored? One major problem you've solved?" Bruce shook her head dismissively. "This is the problem with the New Democrats, Sean. They're all about social media and viral moments. But when it comes to actual governing, they're nowhere to be found." Hannity sensed the kill shot coming. This was usually the moment when his Democratic guests started stumbling, when they got defensive and lost control of the narrative they'd seen at hand hundreds of times. "Let me ask you this, Congresswoman," Hannity said, his voice taking on that familiar mocking tone. "You're a civil rights attorney, right? You went to law school, passed the bar, all of that. But what makes you think that being a lawyer in Dallas qualifies you to make decisions about national defense, foreign policy, or economic policy? Don't you think the American people deserve representatives who actually understand these complex issues?" The panel laughed. This was the setup for what Hannity expected to be the knockout punch. He was questioning not just her policies, but her fundamental qualifications to be in Congress. "I mean, seriously," Hannity continued, his confidence growing with each word. "You're asking American families to trust someone who's never run a business, never served in the military, never worked in foreign policy. You're basically a small-town lawyer who got lucky in an election. How is that qualification enough for the United States Congress?" Chaffetz was nodding vigorously. "Sean, this goes to the heart of what's wrong with today's Democratic Party. They're elevating people based on identity politics rather than actual qualification." Bruce added, It's clear that Congresswoman Crockett is in over her head. This interview is proving exactly what we've been saying about the quality of candidates the Democrats are running. The studio felt electric with conservative energy. Hannity's audience was eating this. The chat on Fox News's website was exploding with comments, supporting Hannity's aggressive questioning. Everything was going exactly as planned. Hannity prepared for his final assault. Congresswoman, I think it's clear to everyone watching that you're simply not ready for this level of responsibility. Maybe you should go back to practicing law in Dallas and let the adults handle governing. That's when Crockett smiled. Not a nervous smile or a defensive smile, but the confident smile of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. It was the same smile she used to give opposing counsel in Dallas when they walked into one of her traps. Sean, she said, her voice steady and controlled. I really appreciate you laying out your thoughts so clearly, because now I get to respond with some facts that I think you and your panel are going to find very interesting. The change in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Where moments before she had been listening and taking notes, now she was shifting into attack mode. Her posture straightened, her voice gained confidence, and there was a gleam in her eyes that suggested she had been holding back her best material for exactly this moment. Hannity looked slightly confused. This wasn't how these interviews usually went. Democratic guests were supposed to be on the defensive by now, stumbling over their words and looking flustered. But Crockett looked more confident than when the interview started, like a predator that had finally been given permission to hunt. Oh, this should be good, Hannity said, trying to maintain his momentum. Please enlighten us with your facts, Congresswoman. The panel chuckled again, but there was something different in the air now. Crockett was pulling out a folder, organizing papers with the precision of someone who'd spent years preparing for court cases. I'm so glad you asked, Sean, Crockett said, her smile growing wide, because I've done some research on you and your panel, and I think your viewers deserve to know some facts about who's questioning my qualifications tonight. That's when Sean Hannity realized he might have made a terrible mistake. What happened next would go down as one of the most devastating takedowns in cable news history. Crockett didn't raise her voice or lose her composure. Instead, she methodically destroyed each of her attackers with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a trial lawyer. Let's start with you, Sean, Crockett said, consulting her notes. You've spent the last 10 minutes questioning my qualifications for Congress. You want to talk about qualifications? Let's talk about yours. Hannity's confident smirk started to fade. Excuse, you dropped out of NYU after 1 year. You never finished college. You have no degree in journalism, no formal training in political science, and no experience in government. Your entire career is based on reading talking points that other people write for you. The studio went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Even the camera operators stopped moving, afraid to make any noise that might break the tension. Jason Chaffetz shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly realizing that he might be next. Tammy Bruce stared at her notes, probably wishing she had never agreed to be on this panel. The studio audience, which had been so confident and rowdy just minutes earlier, was now holding its collective breath. But here's what's really interesting, Sean, Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. You've made millions of dollars convincing people that you're some kind of political expert, but you've never held elected office, never served in government, and never actually had to make a single decision that affects people's lives. Hannity's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a man who made his living talking, he was remarkably speechless. The confident host who had started this interview expecting to demolish a freshman congresswoman was now being systematically dismantled by someone who had clearly done her homework. Hannity tried to interrupt. Now wait just a minute. Oh, I'm not done. Crockett cut him off smoothly. See, this is what happens when you go up against someone who actually knows how to do research. You want to question my 18 months in Congress? Let's talk about your 18 years of being wrong about almost everything. She pulled out another sheet of paper. Remember when you spent years promoting the Seth Rich conspiracy theory? You had to retract that and publicly apologize. Remember when you said COVID would be over by Easter? Remember when you said the 2020 election was definitely going to be overturned? The panel looked stunned. Chaffetz was staring at his hands. Bruce looked like she wanted to be anywhere else in the world. But wait, it gets better, Crockett said, her voice taking on the rhythm of a closing argument. You want to talk about qualifications? Jason Chaffetz, You're sitting there criticizing my voting record. But didn't you resign from Congress in the middle of your term to become a Fox News contributor? You literally quit your job representing the people of Utah to come work for a cable news network. Chaffetz's face turned red. I served for 6 years. Crockett finished for him. You served 6 years and then quit to take a TV job. And now you're criticizing me for actually staying in Congress and doing the work. She turned to Bruce. And Tammy, you've never held elected office at all, have you? You're a radio host and author. That's it. So please explain to me why your opinion about governing carries more weight than someone who's actually been elected by 400. The devastation was complete, but Crockett wasn't finished. She saved the best for last, and what came next would end Hannity's career dominance forever. But here's what really bothers me, Sean, she said, looking directly into the camera with the intensity of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. You spent the first half of this interview questioning whether a black woman lawyer who was elected to Congress is qualified to be. You know what that sounds like to me? It sounds like the same kind of questioning that's been used to undermine black women in positions of power for generations. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about something much deeper and more personal. Hannity's face went pale as he realized that Crockett had just reframed the entire conversation in a way that made him look like exactly the kind of person he claimed not to be. Hannity tried to regain control. Now you're playing the race card. No, Sean, I'm playing the facts card. Crockett interrupted. The fact is that I graduated from Rhodes College with honors. I got my law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. I practiced civil rights law for over a decade. I won cases against major corporations and fought for working families. I was elected to the Texas House, then to Congress. At every single step, I had to prove myself twice as hard as my white male colleague. She leaned forward slightly, her voice growing more intense. And now I'm sitting here listening to a college dropout, a congressman who quit his job, and a radio host question my qualifications. That's not just insulting to me. That's insulting to every voter in my district who chose me to represent them. The studio was still silent. Hannity looked like he'd been hit by a truck. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be in control. He was supposed to be asking the tough question. But Crockett wasn't done with her masterclass in preparation and precision. You know what else is interesting, Sean? She continued, pulling out yet another document. You've been criticizing my voting record, saying I vote with the radical left. But according to your own network's reporting, I've actually authored or co-authored 12 pieces of legislation in my first term. That includes bipartisan bills on small business support and veterans' health care. She looked directly at the camera again. How many bills have you authored, Sean? How many veterans have you helped? How many small businesses have benefited from your work? Hannity was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And Jason, Crockett turned back to Chaffetz. Since you want to talk about voting records, let's talk about in your 6 years in Congress, you voted against hurricane relief for Texas, against health care for 9/11 first responders, and against funding for schools in rural Utah. But please tell me more about how I'm not serving my constituents. Chaffetz mumbled something inaudible, but Crockett saved her most devastating blow for last. She pulled out one final document and smiled. Sean, I have to thank you for this interview, because you've given me the perfect opportunity to share something with your viewers that I think they'll find very interesting. Hannity looked nervous for the first time in the interview. What's that? This is a copy of your property tax records from Nassau County, Crockett said, holding up the document. You know, the records that show you pay taxes on a $5.3 million mansion in Long Island. The same Sean Hannity who spends every night telling working families that they need to cut spending and live within their means. The color drained from Hannity's face. But here's the really interesting part, Crockett continued. According to these same records, you claimed a tax exemption meant for veterans and first responders. An exemption worth about $60,000 a year. The only problem? You never served in the military or worked as a first responder. The studio was dead silent. You could hear the camera operators breathing. So Sean, before you question my qualifications or my integrity, maybe you should explain to your viewers why you're taking tax breaks meant for heroes, why you sit in your mansion and lecture them about fiscal responsibility. Hannity was stunned into complete silence. His panel looked mortified. The confident, aggressive host who had started the interview expecting an easy victory, was now sitting there looking like he'd been run over by a freight train. Crockett leaned back in her chair, completely calm and composed. "Any other questions about my qualifications, Sean?" The silence in the Fox News studio stretched for what felt like an eternity. Sean Hannity, the man who built his career on never being at a loss for words, sat there speechless while Jasmine Crockett calmly organized her papers like she'd just finished a routine cross-examination. Finally, Hannity cleared his throat and tried to regain some semblance of control. "Well, Congresswoman, we're running out of time here." "Actually, Sean," Crockett interrupted one final time, "I think we have plenty of time for you to respond to what I just shared with your viewers. Would you like to explain the tax exemption issue, or should I?" Hannity's face was bright red now. "We need to go to commercial break." "Of course you do," Crockett said with a smile that could have powered half of Texas. As soon as the cameras cut away, chaos erupted. The clip of Crockett's takedown was already being shared across social media by people who had been watching the live stream. Within minutes, Hannity Destroyed was trending on Twitter, and the video was racking up hundreds of thousands of views. But the viral explosion was just beginning. TikTok users immediately began creating reaction videos, with many young viewers expressing shock that they had never seen anything like this before. "I've never seen anyone prepare for a fight like this," said one viral TikTok with over 2 million views. She came with a whole filing cabinet of receipts. Instagram was flooded with carousel posts breaking down each of Crockett's major points. Political meme accounts worked overtime creating content that captured the devastating nature of her performance. One particularly popular meme showed Hannity's shocked face with the caption, "When you realize you brought talking points to a fact fight." YouTube political commentators scrambled to get reaction videos posted as quickly as possible, knowing that this was the kind of content their audiences craved. Progressive channels celebrated while conservative channels struggled to explain how their hero had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Progressive Twitter absolutely lost its mind with joy. Conservative commentators were scrambling to figure out how to spin what had just happened. Even moderate political observers were admitting that they'd never seen anything quite like Crockett's systematic destruction of Hannity and his panel. The tweets started pouring in within seconds. "Holy shit, Jasmine Crockett just ended Sean Hannity's whole career." A Progressive Voice 23, 47,000 retweets. "I've never seen someone prepare for an interview like this." Crockett came with receipts. A Political Junkie 23,000 retweets. "Hannity just got law schooled by an actual lawyer." A Texas Democrat, 18,000 retweets. But it wasn't just progressives celebrating. Even some conservatives were grudgingly admitting that Crockett had come prepared for battle. "I disagree with her politics, but damn, that was impressive preparation." A conservative on it. "Hannity walked into that one. Never attack a trial lawyer without doing your homework." A right-wing realist. 8,000 retweets. The mainstream media picked up the story within hours. CNN ran a segment called Congresswoman Schools, Fox hosts. MSNBC dedicated an entire hour to analyzing the interview. Even conservative outlets like the Wall Street Journal had to acknowledge that Hannity had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. The most damaging part for Hannity wasn't just the embarrassing interview. It was the tax exemption story that Crockett had revealed. Within 24 hours, investigative reporters were digging deeper into Hannity's finances. The New York Times confirmed that he had indeed claimed veterans' tax exemptions despite never serving in the military. The Nassau County Tax Assessor's office was flooded with calls asking how this could have happened. Hannity tried to do damage control on his show the next night, but the damage was done. His explanation that he had relied on his accountant and wasn't aware of the specific exemptions fell flat. Social media was ruthless in its mockery. Sean Hannity, too dumb to know his own tax returns, but smart enough to lecture Congress, became one of the most popular memes of the week. The impact on Crockett was the opposite. Overnight, she went from being a relatively unknown first-term congresswoman to a national progressive hero. Her Twitter followers jumped from 50,000 to over 300,000 in a single day. Democratic fundraising emails featuring clips from the interview raised over $2 million. More importantly for Crockett's political future, she had proven something that very few politicians ever get the chance to prove. She could go toe-to-toe with the conservative media machine, and not just survive but win decisively. Speaking requests poured in from universities, progressive organizations, and even corporate events. Publishers reached out about book deals. Political strategists started mentioning her name as a future candidate for Senate or even higher office. But the most telling reaction came from her colleagues in Congress. Democrats who had previously seen her as just another freshman member suddenly started seeking her advice on media strategy. Republicans, who had planned to target her in the next election cycle, began reconsidering whether taking on someone with her preparation and skill was worth the risk. The interview also had broader implications for political media. It demonstrated that the old playbook of aggressive interruption and talking points could be defeated by superior preparation and unflappable composure. Political consultants across Washington started advising their clients to prepare for hostile interviews the way Crockett had, with specific facts, documented evidence, and a willingness to go on the offensive. The most fascinating aspect of Crockett's strategy was how methodical it had been. According to sources close to her congressional office, she had spent 3 full days preparing for the Hannity interview. Her staff had compiled opposition research files on not just Hannity but every regular panelist who might appear. They had prepared for multiple attack scenarios and developed response strategies for each one. She treated it like a court case, one aide revealed anonymously. She had binders full of research, backup documentation for every claim she planned to make, and even practiced the interview with staff members playing the roles of Hannity and his panel. This level of preparation stood in stark contrast to how most politicians approached hostile media appearances. Typically, candidates and elected officials would rely on general talking points and hope to survive the interview without major damage. Crockett had flipped the script entirely, turning the interview into an offensive operation designed to expose her attackers' weaknesses. For Hannity, the interview marked a turning point. His ratings remained strong among his core audience, but his reputation among political insiders took a serious hit. Democratic politicians who had previously been reluctant to appear on his show suddenly became more willing to take the risk, knowing that preparation and facts could neutralize his usual tactics. What made Hannity's downfall even more dramatic was the behind-the-scenes fallout at Fox News. According to industry insiders, network executives were furious about the tax exemption revelation. The story had legs and kept generating negative coverage for both Hannity and the network. Internal emails, later leaked to media reporters, showed that Fox executives had been completely blindsided by Crockett's research. "Nobody saw this coming," one Fox producer admitted off the record. "We had Hannity's usual prep team. We had talking points ready. We had the whole format designed to give Sean every advantage. But nobody thought to actually research what she might bring to the table." The network's research team, which typically focused on finding damaging information about Democratic guests, had completely overlooked the possibility that a guest might turn the tables. It was a fundamental failure of preparation that exposed weaknesses in Fox's entire approach to booking hostile interviews. The aftermath at Fox was swift and brutal. Within a week, the entire research team that had prepared for the Crockett interview was reassigned. New protocols were put in place, requiring background checks not just on guests, but on the hosts and panelists as well. The network's bookers were instructed to be much more selective about which Democratic politicians they invited on, particularly those with legal background. "They basically admitted that they had been getting lazy," revealed a former Fox producer who spoke on condition of anonymity. "For years they could just book any Democrat and expect Sean to tear them apart. Nobody thought to prepare for the possibility that the guest might be better prepared than the host." The tax exemption story that Crockett had revealed became a recurring nightmare for Fox's legal department. Advertisers began asking questions about the network's due diligence regarding their star hosts. Several major sponsors quietly reduced their spending during Hannity's show, worried about being associated with the controversy. The tax exemption story continued to dog Hannity for months. He eventually paid back the exemptions and apologized, but the damage to his credibility was significant. Political opponents started referring to him as tax cheat Sean in their fundraising email. More broadly, the interview became a case study in how traditional media power dynamics were shifting. For decades, cable news hosts had held all the advantages in these confrontations. They controlled the format, the timing, and the flow of information. But Crockett had shown that a well-prepared guest could turn those advantages against the host. The academic community took particular notice of Crockett's performance. Sarah Martinez, a political communication professor at Georgetown University, called it a masterclass in strategic communication under pressure. She noted that Crockett had employed several advanced rhetorical techniques that are typically only seen in high-level legal proceedings. What Congresswoman Crockett did was essentially conduct a cross-examination on live television, Dr. Martinez explained in a widely cited analysis. She controlled the narrative flow, introduced evidence systematically, and never allowed the opposition to regain their footing. It was textbook trial advocacy adapted for the television medium. The interview was quickly incorporated into political communication courses across the country. Students analyzed Crockett's preparation methods, her pacing during the confrontation, and her strategic use of documentary evidence. Communication professors began teaching what became known as the Crockett method: thorough research, systematic preparation, and offensive rather than defensive positioning in hostile media environments. Political science professors started using the interview as an example of how modern politicians needed to adapt to hostile media environments. Law schools began incorporating it into their trial advocacy courses as an example of effective cross-examination techniques. The interview also highlighted the changing demographics and expectations of American politics. Crockett represented a new generation of politicians, diverse, highly educated, and unwilling to accept the traditional power structures that had dominated Washington for decades. Her success against Hannity sent a message to other young politicians, particularly women of color, that they didn't have to accept being talked down to or dismissed by media figures who had never accomplished what they had accomplished. The intersectional impact of Crockett's victory was particularly significant. As a black woman in politics, she faced unique challenges that her white male colleagues never encountered. The questioning of her qualifications, the dismissive tone, and the assumption that she could be easily overwhelmed were all familiar patterns that black women in professional settings had experienced for generations. When Crockett turned those attacks around and questioned her attackers' qualifications instead, it resonated far beyond politics. Black women lawyers, doctors, professors, and business leaders across the country saw themselves in her performance. Social media was flooded with stories from professional black women who shared their own experiences of having their qualifications questioned by less qualified white colleagues. "I felt like I was watching myself in every job interview I've ever had," tweeted Dr. Angela Williams, a prominent surgeon. The difference is that Congresswoman Crockett had the receipts ready and the platform to use them. The victory also had international implications. Political observers in other countries began studying the interview as an example of how marginalized voices could effectively challenge established power structures. International media covered the story extensively, with many outlets framing it as a watershed moment for American political discourse. 6 months later, when Crockett announced her re-election campaign, she raised more money in her first fundraising quarter than she had in her entire previous campaign. The video of her Hannity takedown became her campaign's opening ad, with the tagline "Jasmine Crockett bringing facts to the fight." The interview also changed how Fox News approached booking Democratic guests. Producers became much more careful about researching their guests' backgrounds and potential lines of attack. The days of assuming that any Democrat could be easily overwhelmed were over. For Sean Hannity personally, the interview was a humbling experience that forced him to reconsider his approach to hostile interviews. While he remained combative with Democratic guests, he became more careful about making personal attacks without solid ground to stand on. But perhaps the most important long-term impact was what the interview said about the future of American political discourse. In an era where soundbites and Twitter gotchas often dominated political conversation, Crockett had shown that thorough preparation, factual accuracy, and intellectual rigor could still carry the day. Her performance became a template for how politicians could fight back against bad faith attacks and media manipulation. Instead of playing defense or trying to change the subject, she had shown that the best response to aggression was superior preparation and a willingness to take the fight directly to your attacker. The interview ended up being a watershed moment that shifted the balance of power in political media. It proved that with enough preparation and courage, even the most intimidating media bullies could be defeated, and it established Jasmine Crockett as one of the most formidable political communicators of her generation. What made this moment even more powerful was the timing. In an era where political discourse often felt dominated by soundbites and manufactured outrage, Crockett had demonstrated that substance could still triumph over style. Her methodical approach and factual precision stood in stark contrast to the usual shouting matches that characterized cable news political programming. The interview also marked a generational shift in how politicians approached media appearances. Older politicians had often tried to survive hostile interviews by staying on message and avoiding mistakes. Crockett had shown that the new generation was willing to go on the offensive, using superior preparation and research to turn the tables on their interrogators. As the dust settled weeks later, one thing was clear: Sean Hannity had picked the wrong fight with the wrong person at the wrong time. and Jasmine Crockett had turned what was supposed to be her political destruction into her national political birth. The lesson for politicians everywhere was simple: come prepared, bring receipts, and never let anyone question your qualifications without being ready to question theirs right back. In the months following the interview, Crockett's office was flooded with requests from other politicians seeking advice on media strategy. She eventually formalized this into a workshop series called Preparation Over Intimidation, which she conducted for freshman members of Congress and state legislators across the country. The workshop covered everything from opposition research techniques to managing adrenaline during hostile interviews. Crockett emphasized that the key wasn't just having information, but organizing it in a way that could be deployed strategically during rapid-fire exchange. The goal isn't to embarrass your opponent, Crockett explained to one group of attendees. The goal is to establish your credibility and competence while exposing the hypocrisy or ignorance of those who would dismiss you. When Sean Hannity questioned my qualifications, he opened the door for me to question his. That's not personal, that's strategic. The workshop became so popular that Crockett's team eventually created an online version that reached thousands of political candidates and activists. The techniques she taught began showing up in political interviews across the country, as more and more politicians adopted her approach of thorough preparation and strategic offense. Political science departments at major universities began reaching out to Crockett's office, requesting guest lectures on strategic political communication. Harvard's Kennedy School of Government invited her to conduct a masterclass on preparation as power that was attended by students, faculty, and visiting politicians from around the world. The ripple effects extended far beyond American politics. International political consultants began studying her techniques and adapting them for their own clients. Parliamentary systems in Europe and Canada saw politicians attempting similar strategies when facing hostile media questioning. What Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated, explained James Richardson, a political communication expert at Oxford University, is that the traditional power dynamics of political media can be completely reversed through superior preparation and strategic thinking. She's created a new template that politicians worldwide are now studying and implementing. And for viewers who want to see more moments like this, where preparation and facts triumph over bluster and bullying, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because in today's political climate, these moments of genuine accountability are more important than ever. The battle between substance and spin continues every day, and it's up to all of us to demand better from our political discourse. Jasmine Crockett showed us what's possible when someone refuses to be intimidated and comes armed with nothing but the truth. That's a lesson worth remembering, and a standard worth demanding from all our political leaders.